Let's talk about Pete Hegseth now, briefly, because the show's going long, but I do want to touch on them because it actually relates directly to this. It appears that Trump and Hegseth are effectively throwing this admiral,
yes,
who was involved in the first boat bombing, that was revealed to have been this double tap strike, which we talked about yesterday. 2 survivors remained, and then they do another drone strike to murder those other 2 survivors. Now, I think the whole thing was illegal. I think the first strike was illegal. I think the second strike was even more clearly illegal. Like, I think it was all murder. I do not think we are at war with drug traffickers. I don't think they have the authority to do this. But if you accept their logic, which again you shouldn't, but if you accept their logic, then that second one is almost clear. It's like a textbook definition of a war crime. Literally in the UCMJ manual, where they talk about when it would be appropriate to disobey orders, the example they use is 2 survivors clinging to a shipwreck. That is literally the textbook example that is used of this is the time when you should disobey the orders because they are so clearly unlawful. So that's why this is getting so much attention. And Pete, we covered yesterday, did not really deny the reporting. Of course, objected to the idea that it was illegal, did not deny the reporting. And then yesterday, he and Caroline Leavitt, from the podium, really seeks to position the decision-making as having not been really with Pete Hegseth, but with this admiral who was involved. And I'll get in a moment to why this is relevant to the pardon conversation, although you guys can probably put the pieces together here. But let's go ahead and take a listen to F3. This is Caroline Leavitt being asked about this double tap strike.
Does the administration deny that that second strike happened, or did it happen and the administration denies that Secretary Hegseth gave the order?
The latter is true, Abe, and I have a statement to read for you here. President Trump and Secretary Hegseth have made it clear that presidentially designated narco-terrorist groups are subject to lethal targeting in accordance with the laws of war. With respect to the strikes in question on September 2nd, Secretary Hegseth authorized Admiral Bradley to conduct these kinetic strikes. Admiral Bradley worked well within his authority and the law, directing the engagement to ensure the boat was destroyed and the threat to the United States of America was eliminated.
So Admiral Bradley. So Pete directed Admiral Bradley, and then, he definitely was within the laws of war. But they're really shifting the decision-making from, the original report was that Pete had said, kill everybody. And then that was the order that led to this double tap strike. I also want to point out, Saagar, people are surfacing, at the time, because I don't know if you guys remember, they shared the first bombing of the boat, not the second part, but the first part they shared on Twitter and was bragging about. And Pete was doing a whole victory lap around this. And he talked about how he watched it live and how deeply involved he was in this whole process. Now he's trying to position himself like, oh, Admiral Bradley was totally within his rights, but it was totally his decision, not mine.
Yeah, can we go, let's skip ahead to F7 just to show this. So Pete says, let's make one thing crystal clear. Admiral Bradley is an American hero, a true professional, and has 100% support. I stand by him in the combat decisions he has made on the September 2nd mission and all others since. America is for. If you are men and women who are serving in the armed forces, how can you possibly think that these people are going to have your back when they're the ones who are putting you potentially in legal jeopardy and then hang your ass out to dry whenever anything gets even remotely hot? At least have the courage to stand up and own the overall attack. Now, let's go to the New York Times story, F5. Everything is murky. Stick with us because we will eventually get to this. Hegseth ordered a lethal attack, but not the killing of survivors, officials say. So they interviewed 5 people. I'm assuming basically everybody goes on the record here, on background here for who is actually involved. What they said is that Hegseth told them, go and kill people on the boat. They do the initial strike. According to them, he didn't say, after the survivors existed, go and kill them. Bradley ordered a secondary strike to, quote, Bradley ordered a secondary strike. This is where everything becomes complicated. What they say is that, quote, before the attack, he had briefed them on his execute order to engage the boat with a lethal force, but they did not address what should happen if people survived. What then happened is that Admiral Bradley had an intended second strike, and the intention of that strike is kind of unclear. As in, was he going in to try and to kill the survivors? Was he apparently going in to try and destroy the rest of the so-called drug cargo? Or, by the way, no evidence of that, but at the very least, of this second drug cargo, of the rest of the boat. So what they say is that in real armed naval conflict, it is lawful to fire on a partly disabled enemy warship that is continuing to maneuver or fire its guns, even if there's a wounded sailor aboard or a shipwrecked sailor clinging. But if the warship signals it's out of the fight by ceasing firing and lowering its colors, then it becomes, this is the problem though, these are drug boats. Well, okay, there's your boats that they say are drug boats. And the two people on them, they don't have color. It's not the United, it's not the British Navy versus the Nazi.
Yeah, they're not firing on anyone.
There's nobody, well, yeah, exactly. I mean, there's no evidence they're firing on people.
They never claimed that either.
They're saying that the drugs on board are the ones that are an imminent threat to America, that they're narco-terrorists. So it's like, what the hell is going on here? And this is part of what, look, this is going to get bogged down in tediousness where everyone will say, oh, well, technically the point is that the strikes are bullshit, all right? They're just bull. Like, that's why even getting into all of this, like, well, the second strike, no. They have a memo which has never been released. It's a secret memo, which is, it reminds me of the secret NSA spying from back in the 2000s, where they're like, we have determined that the strikes are illegal. Can we see the memo? No, you can't see it. Okay. We have determined these are terrorist groups, and that even though Congress has never declared war, that we are in an armed conflict, and thus have the authority. This is even sketchier than the drone strike authorities during the war on terror.
Yeah.
But I do also want to say, what a lot of people are pointing out is that all of this happened during the war on terror. And that's the problem, is that this became normalized and has now moved into the Caribbean with the same bullshit, sketchy legal authority that we bombed Somalia, Yemen, Libya, Afghanistan, Iraq. How many times have we gone through all these strikes? You see people on target, C1, people were like, oh, well, we used to do this all the time in Afghanistan. I'm like, yeah, that's not a defense though. It's like,
exactly.
That's the issue, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, and I think, to me, you're right about the, getting into the weeds on this misses the point in a couple of ways. Number one, the whole shit is illegal. It's all, the first strike was illegal, the second strike is illegal, the whole operation is illegal, it's unconscionable. These are all, this is not even war crimes, this is murder, right? Okay, that's in one way that the details miss the point. But the part that matters is the fact that they are scrambling to say, oh, Pete had nothing to do with the second strike. Tells you they are actually worried about the judgment of what this meant and the legal grounds, the very shaky legal grounds on which it stands. So that, to me, is the importance of this squabbling and trying to nitpick the exact details of who said what and when and who is technically responsible. And Pete in the White House aggressively, we stand behind Admiral Bradley and the decisions that he definitely totally made all on his own on that day. That blame shifting is, I think, what's really notable and shows you a level of nervousness, because what do we have now? We have a bipartisan Senate and a bipartisan House, and Ro Khanna once again stepping up, involved in this, bipartisan House investigation into what the hell happened here. So this is where you get to, okay, let's talk again about these pardon powers that Trump has used so expansively. Imagine you are Admiral Bradley and you are not, a household name with, all the cover of, all the elite cover that comes with that. Not that admirals aren't their own form of elites, but we'll put that aside for the moment. Okay, you're being asked to testify now. What happened on that day? Are you going to contradict the White House and their version of events? When you're worried about your own ass and your potential legal liability, are you going to contradict them when you know that the key to you staying in legal good graces is the president's pardon power, and the last thing you want to do is piss him off, even if it means that you have to lie and cover up what actually happened on that day and what you actually think about it? That is the landscape that exists now. And so that's why, these pardon powers, it's not just about these, even though that's bad too, these fraudsters who are being let off the hook. It's also about the way it shapes behavior of people inside this administration right now, today, and the ethical and moral landscape and the choice array that it sets up for them. So that's why this is all very significant, the way they're setting this up and the way that they're framing it. And, I think this is one of the first times where we've seen some Republicans get a little bit nervous, express some concern, and even in some cases, some outright disapproval about the, the lawlessness with which this administration has conducted itself in these operations.
Here's you know why, is that they are putting all of these people in such a shit situation.
Absolutely.
For example, at Bradley, he's a SOCOM commander, career Navy SEAL. He should not be worrying about whether his ass is legally on the line or not whenever he's in the middle of an operation. Now, he's in a shit position, right? Because they're like, well, the SecDef said it's legal. Or SecWar, sorry, I apologize. The SecWar said it was illegal, so we can go ahead. And now, all of a sudden, this guy, who's a career naval official, Navy SEAL, is now a name who's going to be called and subpoenaed before. What is he supposed to do, right? And then what about the guys under his command? Right. Allegedly, this is supposed to be SEAL Team 6. We have the Tier 1 special operators who, again, they're used to going on these types of missions. They probably didn't even really know what the legality situation of, and now all of a sudden they are now in it. They're like, oh my God, like, are we going to get called in to before Congress? They should never have to worry about that. That's why the process
will be.
Yeah, they will be. Exactly. Yeah. So the process is supposed to work. Congress declares war. We're good. Done. Dusted. Right? You have an authority, laws of war. That's why even, reading the naval warfare thing, they're like, oh, if they lower their, it doesn't apply. Right. And that's why we have all of these, processes and all these other things in place. And it was sketchy even under the 2001 AUMF against terrorism. Now, we'll get to that. Like, the fact is like, we normalized a lot of this behavior, which set the terms for this. But this one is even crazier, because it's supposed to be a domestic law enforcement thing that then just gets determined active conflict, which is also part of an ideological regime change operation in Venezuela, which is why the whole thing is just completely insane. And so what they've done here to these operators, it's unconscionable, because they've put them in a horrible situation. Like, the civilian leaders are the ones who are 100% should own this. And the fact that they're trying to pass this off to a decorated U.S. Navy SEAL SOCOM commander, total bullshit. Yeah. Bullshit. I mean, it really is.
And here's the thing is like, I keep going back to that article about how these nonprofits that provide legal advice to service members, how they've seen this uptick in calls where people are calling them like, what do you think about this? And they said that it was the higher level. It was like not, the rank and file. It was higher level people who were in decision-making positions, because they have some awareness of this way this normally functions is not functioning now. I no longer have faith that there's even, some jag and some process where there's any kind of a legal justification that at all remotely passes muster being prepared here. And so they're having to themselves become like lawyers. And, if you're in the military, you're going to be schooled in the laws of war. That's part of your training. And I assume the higher you are up the ladder, the more integral that is to your training. But you're still not a lawyer. And now you're having to question everything that comes in and say, well, is this, like, what am I going to say about this if I get called in front of a congressional committee and under oath have to testify? What am I going to say about this if the Democrats take power? Suddenly my ass is charged with a war crime. Like, how is this all going to go? That's where they are right now. So, I think this is probably pretty eye-opening for a lot of people to see them so brazenly pass the buck like this and try to wash Pete's hands of responsibility. And the last thing I'll say about this whole dynamic, and part of why I think this is kind of breaking through, is because Pete Hegseth, even, putting any sort of ideological, like, valence aside, people just feel like he's chaotic, like he's been a shitty at his job. I think that's evidenced by the fact that, he's not really integral. He's not on this inside Marco Rubio, Steve Witkoff team that's involved in these big decisions. He's been somewhat sidelined in that regard. His leadership has zero confidence with the Pentagon. A lot of people just don't like this dude. And one thing I've seen in, whether it's in media or in other spaces, is when, there start to be some cracks in the facade. If people really love you and they appreciate you or they respect you, then they'll sort of circle the wagons. And if they hate you and they are pissed off at the way you've handled yourself, or perhaps the way you've knifed them or knifed them in the back in some instances that we have some awareness of, guess what? maybe they're not going to be there to protect you, or maybe they're going to be the ones leaking. Maybe they're going to be the ones who are, providing information that leads to your downfall. That's where those interpersonal dynamics start to become very, very important.
Right. That's what's happening with Kash Patel. Like, remember?
Yeah,
These are Republicans in the FBI who are like, yo, this guy's a clown. Right?
Yeah. Fuck this dude and his insecurities and his temper tantrums,
Same thing
because of his
continue.
own incompetence.
That's right. All right. So there you go. Thank you guys so much for watching. Appreciate it. We'll see you all later.
Hey, if you like that video, hit the like button or leave a comment below. It really helps get the show to more people.
And if you'd like to get the full show ad-free and in your inbox every morning, you can sign up at breakingpoints.com.
That's right. Get the full show, help support the future of independent media at breakingpoints.com.